I stood in the back office of David's tech repair shop, my hands trembling so violently that I had to grip the edge of his desk to steady myself. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic on Greenwich Avenue. But all of that felt impossibly far away. My entire focus was locked on the phone screen David was holding toward me, and what I was seeing there made my stomach twist into knots so tight I thought I might be sick right there on his floor. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," David said quietly, his voice heavy with something between pity and protective anger. "I know this is the last thing you expected when you dropped off Richard's phone this morning." That was the understatement of the century. When I'd walked into David's Electronics and Repair at 9:30 that morning, I'd been thinking about what to make for dinner. Richard had been complaining for days that his iPhone wasn't charging properly, and he'd asked me to drop it off with David since he had back-to-back meetings all day. It was such a mundane errand, the kind of thing you do without a second thought after 32 years of marriage. Take the phone to David, pick up dry cleaning, stop by the market for fresh basil. Normal Tuesday morning tasks for a 58-year-old retired museum curator with nothing more pressing than planning her garden party for the following weekend. But now, at 4:15 in the afternoon, I was staring at messages on my husband's phone that made my blood run cold. "Cancel your credit cards immediately," David had said when I arrived to pick up the phone, his face ashen as he'd pulled me into his back office. "Change every password you have and call the police." I'd laughed nervously at first, thinking he was joking, though David had never been one for jokes. "David, what are you talking about? What happened? Did someone steal Richard's information?" He turned the phone screen toward me then, and that's when my world had started crumbling. "It's worse than that. Much worse." The phone displayed an encrypted messaging app I'd never seen before. Not WhatsApp or regular text messages. This was something called Secure Chat, with a black interface and messages that appeared in white text. The conversation thread was between Richard and someone saved in his contacts as simply V, and as my eyes scanned down the messages, each one felt like a physical blow. 3 weeks until hiking accident, V had written 2 days ago. Everything in place? Richard's response made my knees weak. Yes, trail is perfect. Steep ravine, isolated area. I'll suggest romantic walk after dinner. She never suspects anything. 32 years of conditioning pays off. I felt David's hand on my elbow, steadying me. "Sit down, Margaret, please." I let him guide me into the worn leather chair beside his workbench, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. My brain was trying desperately to make sense of what I was reading, to find some other explanation, but the words were brutally clear. "Keep scrolling," David said gently. "You need to see all of it." My fingers, still shaking, swiped upward through the conversation. The messages went back months, 8 months, to be precise. I could see the timestamps. It had started in March, just 6 weeks after my father passed away and left me his estate. "She signed the POA documents today," Richard had written on April 15th. "Didn't even read them, just smiled and signed where I pointed. The trust modification papers go through next week." V's response: "Beautiful. Once those are processed, we're golden. Is she still taking the life insurance physical? Thursday morning, $2 million policy. She thinks it's for our security." I almost laughed. I made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. David crouched beside my chair, his weathered face creased with concern. He was 63, had known our family for 15 years, had repaired countless devices for us over the years. He'd attended our holiday parties. Richard had played golf with him, and now he was showing me evidence that my husband was planning to murder me. "How did you find this?" I whispered, my voice barely working. David ran a hand through his gray hair. "The charging port was fried, needed complete replacement. Standard procedure is to test all functions after repair. When I powered up the phone to check it, this app was open. He must have forgotten to close it last time he used it. Margaret, I'm former cybersecurity. Worked for the government for 20 years before I opened this shop. I recognized what I was seeing immediately, and I knew I had to look further. For your safety." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be some mistake, but I kept scrolling through the messages, and each one was more damning than the last. "The trust is worth $8.4 million, Richard had written, "but I can't touch it while she's alive. It's ironclad. Her father made sure of that. Only way is if I'm her widower and the modified documents transfer it to me. And the girls? V had asked. Emily and Sarah? They'll be devastated, of course, but they're busy with their own lives. Boston and Seattle. They'll accept it eventually. Might even feel sorry for me, the grieving widower. That'll be useful. I felt something crack inside my chest. The casual way he discussed our daughters, the cold calculation in every word. This was Richard. My Richard. The man I'd spent 32 years building a life with. The man I'd raised 2 beautiful daughters with. The man who'd held my hand at my father's funeral just 18 months ago and promised me we'd face this grief together. Margaret, there's more, David said quietly. The forged documents. Do you want to see them? I nodded, not trusting my voice. David tapped on the phone, opening the Photos app. There were dozens of images, documents with my signature, papers I didn't remember signing. A will that I'd never seen before, leaving everything to Richard. Power of attorney papers dated 3 months ago. Trust modification forms with my name signed at the bottom in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, but that I had absolutely no memory of creating. I didn't sign these, I said, my voice stronger now. David, I never signed any of these documents. I know. Look at this. He zoomed in on one of the signatures. See the slight tremor here? And the way the M is connected to the A? That's not how you write. I've seen your signature dozens of times on credit card receipts in my shop. This is a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. Who is V? David switched back to the messaging app and tapped on the contact. According to some of their earlier messages, her name is Vivian. But I did some digging, Margaret. I hope you don't mind, but I felt it was necessary. I ran some of the information from their conversations through some databases I still have access to. Vivian Cortez, she's a known con artist, has warrants in Florida and Nevada for fraud and identity theft. She's done this before, targeted wealthy people, especially older individuals. This is what she does. And Richard knows this? From what I can tell from the messages, yes. They met online 8 months ago. She reached out to him initially, probably found him through professional networks, saw he was married to a woman who'd just inherited a significant estate. She's been guiding him through this entire process. I felt cold fury beginning to replace the shock. He's been planning to kill me for 8 months. Yes, David said simply. I looked up at him. This kind man with worry lines etched deep around his eyes. Why are you helping me? You could have just given me back the phone, said nothing, stayed out of it. David's expression hardened. Because my sister was killed by her husband for her inheritance 23 years ago. He pushed her down the stairs, made it look like an accident. We couldn't prove anything. He got away with it, got her money, married his girlfriend 6 months later. I swore then that if I ever saw something like this happening again, I wouldn't stay silent. I couldn't live with myself if I let this happen to you. Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for tears later. Right now, I needed to think. I needed to be smart. What do I do? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. David pulled up a chair and sat down facing me. First, you can't let Richard know that you know. Not yet. If he realizes you've discovered his plan, he might accelerate the timeline or destroy evidence. Second, you need a lawyer. The best one you can find. Third, you need to document everything. I've already taken photos of all the messages and documents on my personal device, but we need to preserve the original evidence. Fourth, you need to freeze your assets, change passwords, secure everything. And fifth, he paused, his voice dropping lower, you need to involve law enforcement. This isn't just about divorce, Margaret. This is conspiracy to commit murder. This is fraud, forgery, identity theft. These are serious federal crimes. I absorbed his words, my mind racing. The hiking accident. He mentioned it's planned for 3 weeks from now. Based on the messages, yes. They've been discussing taking you on a romantic walk on your property, somewhere with steep terrain. He'd push you, make it look like you slipped and fell. He's been suggesting these walks to you, hasn't he? Getting you comfortable with the idea? My stomach turned as I remembered. Yes. For the past month, Richard had been unusually affectionate, suggesting we take evening walks around our 10-acre property in Greenwich. We had wooded trails, a beautiful ravine with a creek at the bottom. I'd thought he was being romantic, trying to reconnect after my father's death had made me withdrawn and sad. But he'd been rehearsing my murder. "I need to go home," I said, standing up abruptly. "He'll wonder where I am. I was supposed to pick up the phone and come straight back." David stood too, gripping my shoulders gently. "Can you do this? Can you go home and act normal? Because if you can't, if you think you'll confront him, you need to stay away. Go to a hotel. Let me call the police right now." I took a deep breath, feeling something cold and hard settling into place inside my chest. Richard had underestimated me. He'd spent 32 years thinking I was soft, trusting, easy to manipulate. He'd called me conditioned. He thought I would die quietly, conveniently, never seeing it coming. He was wrong. "I can do it," I said firmly. "I can go home and act like nothing has changed, because nothing has changed for him. He doesn't know I know, and that's my advantage." David nodded slowly. "I'm going to text you my personal cell number. Call me anytime, day or night. And Margaret, promise me you'll call a lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. Don't wait." "I promise." He handed me Richard's phone, now fully repaired. "One more thing. Don't let him know the app was open. If he asks if everything was okay with the phone, just say it was the charging port like he thought." I took the phone, its weight in my hand, feeling like it held all the evidence of my husband's betrayal and murderous intent. "Thank you, David. You saved my life today. You know that, right?" His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Just promise me you'll save it yourself now. Don't let him win." I walked out of David's shop into the late afternoon sunshine of Greenwich Avenue, the phone clutched in my hand, and headed toward my car. I had a 20-minute drive back to our house on Round Hill Road, 20 minutes to compose myself, to prepare to walk through the door and smile at the man who was planning to murder me in 3 weeks. Richard wanted to destroy me for my inheritance. He wanted to erase me like I was nothing more than an obstacle between him and $8.4 million. But I wasn't nothing. I was Margaret Ashford. I'd spent 30 years as a museum curator, protecting priceless artifacts, negotiating with boards of directors, managing multi-million-dollar budgets. I'd raised 2 strong, accomplished daughters. I'd survived my father's death and the grief that followed. And now I would survive this. Richard had made one critical mistake. He'd forgotten that the woman he married wasn't weak. I'd just been trusting. And there's a profound difference between those two things. As I started my car and pulled out onto Greenwich Avenue, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive this. I would make sure Richard paid for every single crime he'd committed, every document he'd forged, every message he'd sent, planning my death. 3 weeks. That's how long he thought he had left. But his timeline had just changed. Mine started now. 6 months ago, I'd been standing in almost this exact spot in my driveway, but the world had been completely different then. It was early April, and Richard and I had just returned from celebrating our 32nd wedding anniversary in Tuscany. We'd spent 2 weeks in a villa outside Florence, drinking wine, exploring medieval towns, pretending we were young again. Richard had been attentive, romantic even, suggesting we renew our vows someday soon. I'd felt like maybe we were entering a new phase of our marriage, one where we could finally enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work. I should have known something was wrong then. Richard was never spontaneously romantic, but I'd attributed his behavior to relief that my father's estate had finally been settled. Dad had passed away 18 months earlier, and the legal process of transferring his trust to me had been lengthy and complicated. When the final papers came through in late March, I'd inherited $8.4 million in a trust fund that provided financial independence I'd never needed before. Richard made good money as an investment banker. We'd always been comfortable, but this was generational wealth, old money from my father's family shipping business. Richard had seemed genuinely happy for me when the inheritance came through, or at least, that's what I thought I was seeing. Looking back now, I realized what I'd actually witnessed was him calculating, planning, seeing opportunity. The change had been subtle at first. He'd started asking questions about the trust structure. How did it work? Could I access the principal or just the interest? What happened to it if something happened to me? I'd explained that my father had set it up ironclad. I could use the interest and a portion of the principal annually, but the bulk of it was protected. If I died, it would go to our daughters in equal shares, managed by trustees until they turned 40. Richard couldn't inherit it directly unless I changed the trust documents. That seems unfair to me, Richard had said one evening in our sunroom, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. I'm your husband. We've built this life together. Shouldn't I have access to provide for you, to manage things if you're not able? I'd felt a small flutter of discomfort then, but I'd pushed it aside. Dad wanted to protect the family legacy. You understand that, don't you? And we don't need it anyway. We have plenty from your career. He'd smiled and kissed my forehead. Of course, darling. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. But after that conversation, he'd become increasingly focused on estate planning. He'd suggested we update our wills, organize our documents, create power of attorney papers in case either of us became incapacitated. It had seemed prudent, responsible even. We were in our late 50s. These were things mature couples did. So when Richard brought home documents from his attorney, I'd signed them. I'd trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband of 32 years, the father of my children, the man who'd held me when my father died, who'd helped me sort through Dad's belongings, who'd been my rock through the grief. Except he hadn't been my rock. He'd been circling like a vulture, waiting for the inheritance to come through so he could begin planning how to take it all for himself. I thought about Vivian then, the woman Richard had introduced me to exactly once at his company's holiday party in December. She'd been standing beside the bar, striking in a red dress that was slightly too tight, her dark hair swept up elegantly. Richard had waved me over, his hand warm on my lower back. Margaret, this is Vivian Cortez. She's a new consultant working with our wealth management division. Vivian, this is my wife, Margaret. Vivian's handshake had been firm, her smile bright and practiced. Richard speaks so highly of you. Museum curator, right? That must be fascinating work. It was, I'd said, noting the past tense. I recently retired. More time to enjoy life, Vivian had said, her eyes flickering to Richard with something I couldn't quite read. You're lucky to have each other. I'd felt uncomfortable around her, though I couldn't articulate why. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The way she looked at Richard felt too familiar, but I'd dismissed it as my own insecurity. I was 58. My hair was completely gray now, and Vivian was probably in her early 40s, polished and professional. Of course I felt a little threatened. Richard had mentioned her occasionally after that. Vivian suggested this investment strategy. Vivian had interesting insights about offshore asset protection. Vivian thought we should diversify our portfolio. I'd assumed she was just a colleague, someone whose professional opinion he valued. I'd never imagined she was a con artist who'd targeted my husband specifically because she'd researched his wife's inheritance, that she'd seduced him, manipulated him, and was now actively helping him plan my murder. The signs had all been there. I could see them now, with devastating clarity. In May, Richard had insisted I get a complete physical and update my life insurance. We're not getting any younger, darling. Let's make sure everything is current. I'd gone to Dr. Patterson, gotten a clean bill of health, and signed papers for a $2 million life insurance policy with Richard as the primary beneficiary. I remembered the insurance agent saying something about the payout terms, but I hadn't paid attention. I'd been thinking about the garden party I was planning for June. In June, Richard had started suggesting we take evening walks on our property. We owned 10 acres in the Round Hill neighborhood of Greenwich, with beautiful wooded trails that led down to a ravine with a creek at the bottom. The terrain was steep in places, rocky, somewhat dangerous if you weren't careful. We should enjoy this land more, Richard had said. Get some exercise together. You've been so sedentary since you retired. I'd thought he was being thoughtful, encouraging me to be more active. Now I realized he'd been scouting the location for my staged accident, determining the best spot to push me, the angle that would look most believable, the isolated area where no one would witness what really happened. In July, Richard had become suddenly interested in our home security system. He'd called the company and had several cameras removed, claiming we needed more privacy. Specifically, he'd removed the cameras that covered the trail entrances on our property. Too much Big Brother, he'd explained. I don't like feeling watched in my own home. I'd agreed without question. I'd trusted him with everything: our finances, our home, our security. I'd signed documents without reading them carefully because he was my husband, and I assumed he had my best interests at heart. Our daughters had noticed something was off. Emily had called me in August, concerned. "Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad? You seem distant, and he seems different somehow." "We're fine, sweetheart," I'd assured her. "Just adjusting to retirement, to life after losing Grandpa. These transitions take time." But Emily had pressed. "He keeps asking me weird questions about your trust fund, like how it's structured, whether you can modify it. It feels inappropriate." I'd defended him. "He's just trying to understand the estate planning. He wants to make sure we're all protected." Emily had gone quiet for a moment. "Mom, promise me something. Don't sign anything without having me or Sarah look at it first. Or at least your own lawyer. Not Dad's lawyer. Your own." I'd laughed it off. "Emily, you're being paranoid. Your father and I have been married for 32 years. I think I can trust him with paperwork." God, I'd been so naive. My own daughter had sensed something was wrong, had tried to warn me, and I'd dismissed her concerns completely. Sarah had expressed similar worries when she'd visited in September. She'd found Richard in my father's old study, going through filing cabinets. "What are you looking for, Dad?" she'd asked. "Just organizing your mother's inheritance documents," he'd said smoothly, "making sure everything is properly filed." Sarah had told me about it later, troubled. "Mom, why is Dad so focused on your inheritance? It's your money from Grandpa. It feels like he's obsessed with it." I'd made excuses. Richard was detail-oriented. He liked having everything organized. He was just being helpful while I was still grieving and not thinking clearly about financial matters. My daughters had seen the truth, and I'd been blind to it. I thought about all the small moments that should have alerted me. Richard working late more frequently, his phone always face down on tables, his sudden need for privacy, closing doors when he took calls, the way he'd started asking me about my daily routines, where I'd be and when. "Just want to know your schedule, darling, in case I need to reach you." He'd been tracking my movements, planning the perfect time to strike, making sure he knew when I'd be alone, vulnerable, in a position where an accident would seem plausible. And through it all, I'd been completely trusting. I'd been living in our beautiful home on Round Hill Road, tending my gardens, having lunch with friends, attending charity events, planning our daughter's upcoming visits. I'd been existing in a comfortable bubble of privilege and security, never suspecting that my own husband was spending his evenings messaging his mistress about the best way to murder me and forge documents to steal my inheritance. The cruelest part was that I'd actually felt sorry for Richard during this time. I'd thought he seemed stressed, worried about something. I'd encouraged him to take time off work, to relax more, to not carry so much pressure. "We have enough money now," I'd told him gently. "With my inheritance, you could retire early if you wanted. We could travel, enjoy life." He'd smiled at me with what I'd thought was love and gratitude. "Soon, darling. Let's get everything properly organized first. Then we can think about our future." Our future. He'd meant his future. With Vivian. With my money. Without me. As I sat in my car in David's parking lot, these memories flooding back with painful clarity, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman who'd walked into this repair shop this morning no longer existed. That Margaret had been trusting, comfortable, perhaps even a little complacent after years of secure marriage and comfortable life. The Margaret sitting here now was someone different. Someone who'd seen the truth and would never unsee it. Someone who understood exactly what she was up against and exactly what she needed to do. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. My silver hair was still perfectly styled. My makeup was intact. I looked like myself, like the elegant, composed woman Richard expected to see when I walked through the door. Good. I would need every ounce of that composure to pull off what came next. I started the engine and began the drive home to my husband, the man who was planning to murder me in 3 weeks, the man who had no idea that his carefully constructed plan had just completely fallen apart. I pulled into our circular driveway at 5:43, exactly the time Richard would expect me home after running errands in town. Our house rose before me, a stunning colonial revival with white columns and black shutters that we'd purchased 27 years ago when Richard's career had taken off. I'd always loved this house. Now, looking at it, I felt like I was seeing a beautiful trap. Richard's Mercedes was parked in its usual spot. He was home early. My heart rate picked up, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. I could do this. I had to do this. I grabbed Richard's repaired phone from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door, my heels clicking on the brick walkway. The October air was crisp, leaves scattered across our manicured lawn. Everything looked normal, perfect, exactly like a life that wasn't secretly filled with forged documents and murder plans. "Richard?" I called out as I entered, my voice bright and casual. "I'm home. I have your phone." He appeared from his study, still wearing his work clothes minus the jacket, his tie loosened. At 61, Richard was still handsome in that distinguished way that men his age could be. Silver hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that inspired trust. I'd always been proud to stand beside him at events. Now I looked at him and saw a stranger, a dangerous stranger. "Finally," he said, smiling as he walked toward me. "I felt lost without it all day. Did David say what the problem was?" I handed him the phone, watching his face carefully. "Just the charging port, like you thought. He had to replace it completely. Took longer than expected." Richard took the phone, his fingers brushing mine. I forced myself not to recoil. "Thank you for dealing with that, darling. I know it's a nuisance." He glanced at the screen, checking for notifications. I held my breath, wondering if he'd noticed the Secure Chat app, if he'd realized someone had seen those messages, but he just scrolled casually through his emails and pocketed the phone. Perfect timing. I was thinking we could take a walk before dinner. The weather is beautiful, and we haven't been out on the trails in a few days. My blood went cold. The trails. The ravine. Was he already thinking about it? Planning? Or was this just routine now? His way of keeping me comfortable with the idea of isolated walks where accidents could happen. "Actually, I'm exhausted," I said, moving toward the kitchen. "It was a long day in town. Traffic was terrible. Can we just have a quiet dinner at home?" I saw the flash of frustration cross his face before he smoothed it away. "Of course, whatever you prefer. I'll open some wine." As Richard moved to the wine cabinet, I busied myself at the counter, my hands shaking as I pulled out a cutting board. Act normal. Be the wife he expects. Don't let him see that anything has changed. "How was your day?" I asked, the question automatic after 3 decades of marriage. "Busy. Client meetings, the usual chaos. Vivian sent over some interesting portfolio recommendations I want to discuss with you." There it was. Vivian's name dropped so casually into conversation. How many times had he mentioned her in recent months without me thinking anything of it? "That's nice of her," I managed, my voice steady. "She seems very knowledgeable." "She is. Very sharp. She's been invaluable to the team." Richard poured 2 glasses of Cabernet, bringing one to me. "To a quiet evening at home." I clinked my glass against his, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. I took a sip, tasting nothing. All I could think about were those messages. 3 weeks until hiking accident. She never suspects anything. 32 years of conditioning pays off. We moved through dinner preparations like we had thousands of times before. Richard grilled salmon on our back patio while I made a salad. We ate at the kitchen island, discussing trivial things. The weather, our neighbor's new landscaping, Emily's busy schedule at the hospital in Boston. It was all so horrifyingly normal. "I've been thinking," Richard said as he finished his salmon, "we should really finalize our estate planning soon. Get everything properly documented before the holidays. You know how chaotic that season gets." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean? I thought we already updated everything." "Well, yes, but there are always refinements, ways to make things more tax efficient. Vivian actually had some suggestions about structuring your trust that could benefit the girls in the long run." I set down my fork carefully. "My father's trust is already structured. It's ironclad." That was his intention. Richard's smile was patient, almost condescending. "I know, darling. But times change. Tax laws change. It wouldn't hurt to explore options. I'm just thinking of you, of our family." He was pushing, testing, trying to get me to sign more documents, probably to finalize whatever forgeries he'd already created. I needed to deflect without raising suspicion. "Let me think about it," I said softly, playing into the role he expected. "It's still hard for me to think about modifying anything Dad set up. It feels like changing his wishes." Richard reached across and squeezed my hand. The touch made my skin crawl. "I understand. Take your time. There's no rush." But there was a rush. 3 weeks. That was his timeline. I wondered if he'd try to push the documents before then, or if he planned to forge what he needed and execute them after I was dead. After dinner, Richard retreated to his study for what he called work calls. I cleaned up the kitchen, my mind racing. I needed to call a lawyer tomorrow. I needed to secure my assets. I needed to build a case. But tonight, I needed to gather more information. When I heard Richard's voice through his closed study door, talking in low tones, I moved quietly up the stairs to our bedroom. His laptop was on his nightstand, where he always left it. My heart pounding, I opened it. Password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary date. Nothing. Emily's birthday. Nothing. Sarah's birthday. Still nothing. Then, on impulse, I tried Vivian's name with the current year. The screen unlocked. My stomach turned. He'd changed his password to her name. I quickly opened his email, scanning through the inbox. Most of it was work-related, but then I found a folder labeled Personal Finance. Inside were email chains with someone named Arthur Brennan, an attorney I'd never heard of. The emails discussed document preparation, signature verification processes, trust law in Connecticut. There were attachments. I opened one. It was a modified trust document with my signature at the bottom, a signature I'd never written. The modification transferred control of my father's entire trust to Richard as trustee and primary beneficiary upon my death. It was dated 3 months ago, notarized by someone named Carol Henderson. I opened another attachment, a will, supposedly signed by me just 2 months ago, leaving everything to Richard with only token amounts to our daughters. Given that Emily and Sarah are well established in their careers and financially independent, I wish to ensure my beloved husband Richard is fully provided for in the manner our long marriage deserves. I would never write those words, never minimize my daughter's inheritance that way. But the signature looked exactly like mine. There were more documents, power of attorney papers giving Richard complete control over all my assets, my healthcare decisions, everything. Life insurance beneficiary forms, bank account modification forms, every single document bore my forged signature. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly closed the laptop, placing it exactly where I'd found it, and moved into our bathroom, turning on the water as if I'd been washing my face. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the marble countertop. "Margaret," Richard's voice came from the bedroom. "Are you coming to bed soon?" "Just getting ready," I called back, forcing brightness into my voice. "Long day." I stared at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with fear and fury. I splashed cold water on my cheeks, trying to compose myself. I couldn't sleep next to him tonight. I couldn't lie in bed with a man who was planning to murder me, but I had to. I had to maintain the facade until I had everything in place to destroy him. When I emerged from the bathroom in my nightgown, Richard was already in bed, scrolling through his phone. That phone that David had repaired. That phone that contained all the evidence of his crimes. He had no idea I knew everything. I slipped into bed beside him, maintaining the distance that had become normal over the past year. He'd told me he was having back problems, needed space to sleep comfortably. Now I realized he probably didn't want to touch me. Didn't want the intimacy of sleeping close to a woman he was planning to kill. "Good night, darling," he said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. His lips felt like ice. "Good night," I whispered. He turned off his bedside lamp. I lay in the darkness, listening to his breathing eventually slow and deepen. He fell asleep easily, peacefully. The man planning my murder slept like a baby. I didn't sleep at all. At 6 a.m, while Richard was in the shower, I went downstairs and used the landline in the kitchen to call David's cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "Margaret, are you all right?" "I need a lawyer," I said quietly. "The best one you know. Someone who handles criminal cases, fraud, all of it. Today, David. I need to see them today. I know someone. Patricia Thornton. She's a barracuda. Handled my sister's case, though we called her too late. She'll help you. I'll text you her number right now. Thank you. And David, I found more evidence. On his laptop, dozens of forged documents. This is bigger than we thought." There was a pause. "Margaret, you need to be careful. If he suspects you know, he doesn't. I promise you he has no idea. I played the perfect wife last night, but I can't keep this up for long. I need to move fast. Call Patricia the moment her office opens. I'll let her know you're coming. She'll see you immediately when I explain the situation." I hung up as I heard the shower turn off upstairs. By the time Richard came down for breakfast, I had coffee ready and was reading the newspaper like it was any other Tuesday morning. "I have meetings all day," Richard said, kissing the top of my head. "Don't wait up if I'm late. Might grab dinner in the city with some clients." Or with Vivian, I thought, planning my death over expensive wine. "No problem," I said sweetly. "I have things to do anyway. Lunch with Barbara, then some shopping." All lies. I had an appointment with Patricia Thornton at 10 o'clock. The moment Richard's car pulled out of the driveway, I was moving. I went to his study and photographed every document I could find. Bank statements showing money being moved to accounts I didn't know existed. Nearly $340,000 transferred over the past 6 months. Credit card statements for a separate card in Richard's name only, showing charges at hotels in Manhattan, expensive restaurants, jewelry stores. He'd been living a complete double life. I found a file folder labeled Property Records, and inside were documents for a condo in the Cayman Islands, purchased 4 months ago for $1.2 million, in Richard's name only. He'd already bought the place where he and Vivian would live after my death. The rage that flooded through me was white-hot and clarifying. This wasn't just about murder. This was about a man who'd systematically stolen from me, lied to me, betrayed every vow he'd ever made, and planned to kill me for money. Richard wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a calculating criminal who'd spent months preparing to destroy me. At 9:45, I drove to Patricia Thornton's office in downtown Greenwich. She was exactly what David had described. Mid-50s, sharp gray suit, eyes like a hawk. She listened to everything, examined every photo I'd taken, reviewed the messages David had documented from Richard's phone. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of conspiracy to commit murder I've ever seen," Patricia said, her voice cold and professional. "Combined with fraud, forgery, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. Your husband is looking at 15 to 20 years minimum if we can make all the charges stick. And Mrs. Ashford, we're going to make them stick." She made phone calls while I sat in her office. First to the FBI, because the offshore accounts and interstate fraud made this a federal case. Then to the Connecticut State Police. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a conference room with 3 FBI agents and 2 state detectives, telling them everything. "We need to verify the identity of this Vivian Cortez," Agent Sarah Chen said, tapping notes into her tablet. "If she's who we think she is, she's wanted in connection with similar schemes in Florida and Nevada. She's a professional con artist who targets wealthy individuals through their spouses. This is her pattern." Agent Michael Torres looked at me seriously. "Mrs. Ashford, we want to catch them in the act. Build an airtight case. That means you'd need to continue as normal for a few more days while we investigate and prepare. Can you do that? Can you go home to your husband and act like nothing has changed?" Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to get as far away from Richard as possible. But I thought about those messages, about his casual cruelty, about how he'd called our daughter's tokens to be managed, and me a woman conditioned to obey. "Yes," I said firmly. "I can do it. Tell me exactly what you need me to do." Agent Chen leaned forward. "We want you to wear a wire. Get him to talk about the plan. The forged documents. We need his confession on tape. Can you do that without putting yourself in danger?" I met her eyes. "He thinks I'm weak. He thinks 32 years of marriage have made me predictable and controllable. That's his mistake. Yes, I can get him to talk. What do I say?" Patricia smiled, and it was predatory. "You're going to tell him you want to review the estate documents he mentioned. You're concerned about something in your trust. You need his help understanding the paperwork. You're the confused, dependent wife asking for his guidance. He won't be able to resist explaining his own cleverness." The FBI wanted 2 days to build their case, to track Vivian's location, to coordinate with other agencies. 2 days of sleeping next to a man planning my murder. 2 days of pretending everything was fine. 2 days of being bait in a trap. 2 days, I agreed. "Then what?" "Then we arrest them both," Agent Torres said. "And you get your life back, Mrs. Ashford. The life he tried to steal." I left Patricia's office at 3 in the afternoon with a plan. A team of federal agents backing me up, and a wire device I'd be fitted with tomorrow. I also left with something else, the absolute certainty that I was going to win. Richard had spent 8 months underestimating me, assuming I'd never fight back, never see through his lies. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. When I got home, Richard was already there, earlier than expected. My heart jumped, but I kept my face calm. "You're home early," I said, setting down my shopping bags. I'd actually stopped at Saks to buy things to make my alibi real. "Everything okay?" "Just tired. Thought I'd surprise you. How was lunch with Barbara?" "Lovely. She sends her regards." More lies, layered on lies, just like he'd been doing to me for months. Richard pulled me close, kissing me properly for the first time in weeks. I forced myself not to stiffen, not to pull away. "I love you, Margaret," he said softly. "I know I don't say it enough, but you're everything to me." I looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but calculated performance. "I love you too," I said, each word like broken glass in my throat. 2 more days. I just had to survive 2 more days. And then Richard Ashford would discover that the woman he'd tried to murder was far stronger, far smarter, and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined possible. The wire was smaller than I'd expected, barely larger than a button, taped carefully beneath my cashmere sweater by Agent Chen in Patricia's office. It was Thursday afternoon, exactly 48 hours since I'd discovered Richard's plan. 48 hours of sleeping beside him, eating meals with him, accepting his kisses and gentle touches, while knowing exactly what he intended to do to me. 48 hours of being the best actress of my life. "Remember," Agent Chen said as she adjusted the device, "we need him to discuss the documents, the plan, anything that shows intent. Ask him directly about the trust modifications. Tell him you're confused about something you signed. Make him explain it." My hands were steady as I buttoned my cardigan over the wire. I'd gone beyond fear now. I was operating on pure, cold determination. "FBI agents will be positioned around your property," Agent Torres added, "in unmarked vehicles on the road and 2 in the woods behind your house. The moment you feel unsafe, say the code phrase we discussed. We'll be inside in 30 seconds. The code phrase was, "I need some air." Simple, natural, something I could work into conversation if Richard became suspicious or aggressive. "What about Vivian?" I asked. "We have agents watching her apartment in Manhattan right now. The moment we move on your husband, we arrest her simultaneously. She won't have time to run or destroy evidence." I drove home at 4:30, knowing Richard would arrive around 6. I had time to prepare, to set the stage. I'd asked him this morning if we could have a quiet dinner and discuss some financial matters. He'd agreed immediately, probably thinking I wanted to sign more documents, make his forgery work easier. He had no idea what was actually coming. I set the dining room table carefully, opened a bottle of his favorite wine to let it breathe, and pulled out the folder of financial documents I'd gathered from his study over the past 2 days. Patricia had coached me on exactly what to say, how to lead him into confession without making him suspicious. Richard arrived at 6:15, his face lighting up when he saw the table set, the wine waiting. "This is nice," he said, kissing my cheek. "What's the occasion?" "I wanted to talk about the estate planning you mentioned," I said, my voice soft and slightly uncertain, playing the role perfectly. "I've been thinking about it, and I want to make sure I understand everything. Some of the documents you had me sign earlier, I'm not entirely clear on what they mean." I saw the flash of something in his eyes, calculation, excitement. He thought I was giving him an opening. "Of course, darling. I'm happy to explain anything. Why don't we eat first, then go through it all?" We sat down to dinner, and Richard was more animated than he'd been in months. He poured wine generously, asked about my day, told me amusing stories from the office. He was performing too, playing the attentive husband. Both of us acting, both of us lying, sitting across from each other like players in a deadly game. After dinner, I brought out the folder. "These documents here," I said, pointing to copies I'd made of the forged trust modifications. "You said these were standard updates, but I was talking to my friend Susan yesterday, and she mentioned her trust is structured completely differently. It made me wonder if I understood what I signed." Richard's expression was patient, almost patronizing. "Every trust is different, Margaret. Your father's was particularly complex. These modifications just streamline things, make them more efficient for tax purposes. But this section here, I pointed to the clause that transferred everything to him upon my death. This changes who controls the trust, doesn't it? It says you become the primary beneficiary instead of the girls. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. That's temporary, just for administrative purposes. The girls still inherit ultimately. This just ensures proper management in the interim. But Richard, I don't remember signing this. When did we do this? He stood up, moving around the table to stand beside me, his hand on my shoulder. The touch felt possessive, controlling. You signed it in July, darling. Remember? We were in my study, going through all the estate paperwork. You were a bit distracted that day, thinking about your garden party planning. I forced confusion into my face. I honestly don't remember this document specifically. And this signature, it looks different from how I usually write my name. Richard's hand tightened on my shoulder. You're overthinking this. Trust me. Everything is properly handled. These documents protect you, protect us. But what if something happened to me? I pressed, looking up at him with what I hoped looked like innocent concern. If I died, you'd control everything? Even my father's trust? That's the point of proper estate planning, Margaret. I'd be able to manage everything without legal complications. It's what any good husband would arrange. His voice had an edge now, frustration bleeding through the patience. What about Emily and Sarah? Don't they have concerns about this? The girls don't need to worry about financial matters. They're busy with their careers. This is between us, as it should be. I stood up, moving away from him slightly, putting the table between us. Richard, I want to be completely clear about something. These documents, they're legitimate, right? My signatures are real? His face went very still. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking. Because Susan mentioned that trust modifications require notarization, witnesses, sometimes even court approval depending on the structure. And I don't remember any of that happening. Richard's expression shifted, something cold sliding behind his eyes. Margaret, why are you questioning this now? Why the sudden concern about documents you willingly signed months ago? Because I don't think I did sign them. I let the words hang in the air between us, watching his face carefully. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, but it was wrong, harsh. That's ridiculous. Of course you signed them. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see Dr. Patterson. Have him check if you're having memory issues. He was gaslighting me, trying to make me doubt my own sanity. It was a tactic he'd probably planned to use if I ever questioned anything. I'm not having memory issues, I said firmly. I want to see the original documents, the ones with the notary stamps, the witnesses' signatures. Richard's face flushed. They're in the safe deposit box at the bank. I'll get them next week. I want to see them tomorrow. I want to take them to my own attorney to review. Your own attorney? His voice rose. I'm your husband, Margaret. I've handled our finances for 32 years. Why would you suddenly need your own attorney? Because these are my assets, Richard. My inheritance from my father. And I have the right to understand exactly what I signed. He moved around the table toward me, his face contorted with something between rage and panic. You ungrateful woman. Do you have any idea how much work I've put into organizing your affairs? How much time I've spent protecting you from having to deal with complicated financial matters? Protecting me? I repeated, my voice stronger now. Or protecting yourself? What the hell is that supposed to mean? This was it. The moment. I could feel the wire against my skin, recording everything. It means I know, Richard. I know about Vivian. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the condo in the Cayman Islands. And I know what you're planning to do to me. The color drained from his face. For 3 full seconds, he stood frozen, staring at me like I'd transformed into someone he didn't recognize. Then his hand moved to his pocket, reaching for something. I need some air, I said clearly, loudly. The words were barely out of my mouth when my front door burst open and FBI agents flooded into my dining room, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Richard's hand was still in his pocket, frozen mid-reach. 2 agents grabbed him, pulling his arms behind his back, removing a small handgun from his jacket. He'd been carrying a gun, in our home, at our dinner table. He'd been armed while sitting across from me. Richard Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, forgery, and identity theft, Agent Torres said, snapping handcuffs onto Richard's wrists. Richard's eyes found mine across the chaos, and the hatred in them was pure and visceral. "You bitch," he hissed. "You stupid, meddling bitch. You were supposed to die quietly." Agent Chen stepped between us. "That's enough." As they led Richard toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. "You won't get away with this. Those documents are legal. You signed them. You'll never prove otherwise." I stepped forward, my voice cold and clear. "I already have, Richard. Every message you sent to Vivian, every forged signature, every dollar you stole. The FBI has everything. You're finished." His face crumpled, the mask finally breaking completely. This was the real Richard, the one who'd hidden behind 32 years of performance. Greedy, cruel, willing to murder his own wife for money. As they pushed him through the door, Agent Torres turned to me. "Vivian Cortez was arrested 7 minutes ago at her apartment in Manhattan. She's already asking for a deal. She's going to testify against him, Mrs. Ashford. We have them both." I sank into a dining room chair, my legs suddenly weak. It was over. The wire was still recording my racing heartbeat, but the danger had passed. Richard was in custody. Vivian was arrested. The truth was exposed. I'd won. The house felt enormous and empty after they took Richard away. Agent Chen stayed with me for over an hour, helping me remove the wire, explaining what would happen next, making sure I was stable enough to be alone. But I wasn't alone, not really. There were still 2 agents posted outside, and Patricia Thornton was on her way over with legal documents I needed to sign. "You did extremely well," Agent Chen said as she packed up her equipment. That confession was crystal clear. Combined with the messages from his phone, the forged documents, and Vivian's testimony, this is as airtight as cases get. "What did Vivian say?" I asked, my voice hoarse from tension. "When you arrested her?" Agent Chen's expression was grim. "She started talking immediately. Wanted a deal before we even finished reading her rights. She's a professional con artist, Mrs. Ashford. This is what she does. She finds wealthy people, usually through social media or professional networks, identifies vulnerabilities, and exploits them. Your husband was her 3rd attempted murder conspiracy. The first 2 victims discovered the plot before execution, just like you did. But there have been others where she successfully defrauded people of millions without the murder element." My stomach turned. How did she find Richard? LinkedIn. She researched investment bankers in the Northeast, cross-referenced with public records to find those married to wealthy women, and targeted him specifically. She created a fake consulting firm, fabricated credentials, and engineered an introduction through his company. Your husband thought he was seducing her. In reality, she was running him like a puppet from day one. I thought about Richard's arrogance, his certainty that he was so clever. He'd been a mark all along, manipulated by a professional criminal. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained how a man who'd spent 32 years as a reasonably successful investment banker had suddenly become willing to commit murder. Will she get a reduced sentence for testifying? Probably 15 to 20 years instead of life. But she'll never be free to do this to anyone else again. And your husband? Agent Chen's voice hardened. He's looking at 25 to 30 years minimum. Conspiracy to commit murder carries a mandatory minimum, and with the fraud, forgery, and financial crimes added on, he'll likely die in prison. After Agent Chen left, I walked through my house in a daze. The dining room table still had our wine glasses, the plates from dinner we'd barely touched. The folder of documents lay open. Evidence of Richard's betrayal spread across the polished wood. I gathered everything methodically, putting it all in a box for Patricia. My phone rang. Emily. My heart clenched. I'd asked the FBI to wait before notifying my daughters, wanting to tell them myself, but I hadn't been ready yet. Hadn't known what words could possibly explain what their father had done. "Mom?" Emily's voice was tight with panic. "I just got a call from someone named Patricia Thornton. She said she's your attorney and that there's been an incident with Dad. What's going on? Are you hurt?" I sank onto the sofa, tears finally coming. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm safe. But I need to tell you something about your father, and it's going to be very difficult to hear." "Mom, you're scaring me. What happened?" I told her everything. The phone repair, David's discovery, the messages, the forged documents, the murder plot. Emily was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Emily?" Are you there? I'm here. Her voice was shaking. I'm just trying to process this. Dad was planning to kill you? For money? That's insane. That can't be real. It's real, honey. The FBI arrested him tonight. They arrested his accomplice, the woman he was having an affair with. It's all real. I heard Emily start to cry. I knew something was wrong. When I visited in August, something felt off. The way he looked at you, the way he talked about your inheritance. I told you, remember? I told you something didn't feel right. You did. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. Don't apologize. God, Mom, he could have killed you if David hadn't found those messages. Her voice broke completely. We cried together over the phone, mother and daughter, grieving the man we'd thought we knew, the man who'd never actually existed. I need to call Sarah, Emily said finally. She needs to know. Can I tell her? Or do you want to? You tell her. I can't do it again right now. And Emily, I need you both to know that I'm okay. I'm safe, and I'm going to be fine. This doesn't break me. It doesn't break us. Do you understand? I understand. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, exhausted beyond measure. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Just 12 hours ago, I'd been wearing a wire and setting a trap for my husband. Now he was in federal custody, and I was alone in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger's life. Patricia arrived 20 minutes later with a briefcase full of documents. She sat up at my kitchen island, her efficient movements somehow comforting in their normalcy. The FBI is moving fast, she said, spreading papers before me. Richard's bail hearing is tomorrow morning. Given the severity of the charges and flight risk due to the offshore accounts, they're requesting he be held without bail. I'll be there to represent your interests. What about my assets? The money he stole? We're filing emergency motions to freeze all his accounts, recover the stolen funds, and nullify every forged document. I've already been in contact with your father's trust attorneys. They're appalled and fully cooperative. By Monday, you'll have complete control of your assets again, and Richard won't be able to touch a penny. She slid a document across to me. This is a restraining order. He can't contact you, come near you, or have anyone contact you on his behalf. Sign here. I signed, my hand steady now. This is your divorce filing. Connecticut allows for immediate filing in cases of domestic violence and criminal activity. Given the murder conspiracy, we can fast-track this. You'll be legally separated within days, divorced within months. I signed that too. And this, Patricia's expression softened slightly, is a victim impact statement. You don't have to write it now, but eventually you'll have the opportunity to address the court, to tell your story in your own words, when you're ready. I took that document, but didn't sign it. I wasn't ready yet. The words weren't there yet. One more thing. Patricia pulled out a tablet, turning it toward me. The news has broken. Richard's arrest is all over local media. Investment banker arrested for conspiracy to commit murder of his wealthy wife. I need you to prepare for attention. Reporters may try to contact you. Don't speak to any of them without me present. I looked at the screen. There was Richard's professional headshot from his company website next to a headline, Greenwich banker accused of murder for inheritance plot. The story was already national news. My private nightmare was public spectacle. How do I handle this? I asked quietly. You don't. I do. Any inquiries come through me. You focus on healing and rebuilding. Let the legal system handle the rest. After Patricia left, I called David. He answered immediately. Margaret, I saw the news. Are you okay? I'm safe. It's over. Richard's arrested, Vivian's arrested, and I'm safe. Thank God. I could hear the emotion in his voice. I've been worried sick all day. David, I need to thank you. If you hadn't shown me those messages, if you just fixed the phone and said nothing. Don't, he interrupted gently. Don't think about what could have happened. It didn't happen. You're alive. That's what matters. Will you do something for me? Anything. Will you come over? Just for a little while? I don't want to be alone in this house tonight. He arrived 30 minutes later with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat in my kitchen, eating lo mein and drinking Pinot Grigio, not talking about Richard or murder plots or legal proceedings. We talked about normal things, his grandchildren, the upcoming election, A new restaurant opening downtown. Ordinary conversation that felt like a lifeline to the real world. "What will you do now?" David asked as midnight approached. "Will you stay in this house?" I looked around at the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, the breakfast nook where my daughters had done homework, the windows overlooking gardens I'd planted. No, I can't live here anymore. Too many memories, and they're all contaminated now. Every room has Richard in it. Every corner holds a lie. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Maybe New York, closer to Emily. Maybe somewhere completely new. I have time to decide. I paused, reality settling over me. I'm 58 years old, David. I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like for the next 20 years. Growing old with Richard, becoming a grandmother, traveling in retirement. All of that is gone. No, David said firmly. What's gone is the lie you were living. What you have now is the truth and the freedom to build something real. You're 58, Margaret. You're not old. You're not finished. You're just getting started. His words broke something open inside me, and I started to cry. Not the shocked tears of earlier, but deep, wrenching sobs for the life I'd thought I had, for 32 years of marriage that had been built on sand, for the man I'd loved who'd never existed. David let me cry, didn't try to fix it or minimize it. When the tears finally stopped, he handed me a tissue and said simply, "Better? A little. Thank you for being here. Always. You're not alone in this, Margaret. You have people who care about you. Your daughters, me, Patricia. Even Agent Chen seemed genuinely invested in your well-being. You have a community." After David left, I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Richard for 27 years. His clothes still hung in the closet. His cologne sat on the dresser. His side of the bed was still unmade from this morning when he'd left for work, having no idea he'd never sleep in this house again. I couldn't sleep in that bed. Instead, I went to one of the guest rooms, fresh and untouched by Richard's presence. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. My phone buzzed with a text. "Sarah. Mom, Emily told me everything. I'm catching the first flight tomorrow. I'll be there by noon. I love you so much. You're the strongest person I know." Then Emily. "Requested emergency time off. Flying in tomorrow morning. We're not letting you go through this alone. We love you." Fresh tears came, but these were different. These were tears of gratitude that my daughters, at least, were exactly who I'd always believed them to be. Real. True. Mine. I thought about Richard sitting in a holding cell tonight, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Did he regret it? Was he scared? Did he think about me at all, or only about what he'd lost? I thought about Vivian in her own cell, already cutting deals, already trying to save herself by destroying Richard further. Two criminals who'd found each other and decided my life was worth less than my money. But they'd been wrong. My life was worth everything, and I'd fought for it. I'd been smart enough, strong enough, brave enough to fight back when it would have been easier to stay blind, to keep trusting, to walk into that ravine on our property and let Richard push me to my death. I'd survived, not just physically, but wholly. I'd taken the worst thing that could happen to a person, the ultimate betrayal, and I'd turned it into my victory. The clock on the nightstand glowed 3:15 a.m. when I finally fell asleep. And for the first time in months, I didn't dream of Richard. I didn't dream of anything at all, just deep, dark, peaceful nothingness. When I woke at 7, sunlight was streaming through the guest room windows. Friday morning, the start of my new life, the life where I was no longer Richard Ashford's wife, no longer anyone's victim, no longer the woman who signed documents without reading them or trusted without verifying. I was Margaret Ashford, survivor, fighter, winner, and I was just getting started. 6 months after Richard's arrest, I stood in the empty living room of my Greenwich house, watching the movers load the last of my furniture into the truck. The house had sold in 3 days, well above asking price, to a young family with 2 children who loved the property and had no idea about its dark recent history. I didn't tell them. That wasn't their burden to carry. Emily stood beside me, her hand in mine. "Are you sure about this, Mom? Leaving Greenwich? This has been home for so long." "It was home," I said softly. "But it's not anymore. I need something that's completely mine. Something Richard never touched. My new penthouse apartment in Manhattan was waiting, a stunning space on the Upper East Side with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Close to Emily in Boston, close to museums and culture, close to the life I wanted to build. I decorated it myself, chosen every piece of furniture, every painting, every detail. Nothing from the old house came with me except a few family photographs and my mother's china. Everything else was sold or donated. Clean slate. The legal proceedings had moved faster than Patricia expected. Richard's bail had been denied, and he'd been held in federal detention for 5 months before his trial began. Vivian had testified against him as part of her plea deal, providing details about their planning, the forged documents, the timeline for my murder. She'd been coldly efficient on the stand, showing no remorse, treating it like a business transaction gone wrong. Richard had tried to fight the charges initially. His attorney argued entrapment, claimed the messages were taken out of context, suggested I'd manipulated evidence. But the FBI's case was ironclad. The forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the condo in the Cayman Islands purchased with stolen money, the gun he'd been carrying at our dinner table. Most damning of all, his own words recorded on the wire. "You were supposed to die quietly." In the end, Richard had taken a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. 28 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. He'd be 89 years old if he survived the full sentence. Vivian received 22 years. Both were serving time in separate facilities, forbidden from any contact. I'd attended Richard's sentencing, sitting in the courtroom gallery with Patricia beside me and my daughters behind me. I'd wanted to see his face when the judge handed down his sentence. Wanted him to see mine, to understand that I'd survived him, outlasted him, won completely. When the judge asked if I wanted to read my victim impact statement, I'd stood up. My hands had been steady as I unfolded the paper I'd spent weeks writing and rewriting. "Your Honor, my name is Margaret Ashford. For 32 years I believed I was married to a man I could trust. I raised 2 daughters with him. I built a life with him. I stood beside him through career changes, family losses, and all the normal challenges of a long marriage. When my father died and left me an inheritance, I thought my husband was happy for me, for us, for our security. I never imagined he was calculating how to kill me for that money. I'd looked directly at Richard then. His head was bowed, refusing to meet my eyes. Richard Ashford spent 8 months planning my murder. He forged my signature on dozens of documents. He stole $340,000 from our accounts. He bought property in the Cayman Islands where he planned to live with his mistress after I was dead. He removed security cameras from our home. He purchased a gun. He planned to push me down a ravine on our own property and watch me die. And through it all, he kissed me goodnight, told me he loved me, and played the role of devoted husband. My voice had remained calm, clear, emotionless. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. But I didn't die. I discovered his plan, and I fought back. I worked with law enforcement to build a case. I wore a wire and got his confession. I did everything necessary to ensure he would face justice. And now he will spend the rest of his life in prison, which is exactly what he deserves. I'm here today, not as his victim, but as the woman who survived him, who beat him, who will thrive while he rots in a cell. That's my statement. The courtroom had been absolutely silent when I sat down. The judge had looked at Richard with undisguised contempt before pronouncing sentence. Now, 6 months later, standing in my empty house, I thought about that moment. The moment I'd taken back my power, my voice, my life. "Mom?" Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She'd flown in from Seattle to help with the move. "The movers are ready. Are you ready?" I took one last look around the living room where I'd hosted holiday dinners and book clubs and birthday parties, where I'd lived a life that had been half real and half illusion. Then I turned away from it. I'm ready. The drive into Manhattan took 45 minutes. Emily and Sarah followed in their rental car, planning to spend the weekend helping me settle into the new apartment. As we crossed the bridge into the city, I felt something lift from my chest. Relief, freedom, possibility. My new life was everything I'd wanted and nothing I'd expected. Patricia had recovered every penny Richard had stolen, plus the proceeds from selling the Cayman Islands condo. My father's trust remained intact and under my complete control. I'd paid off the secret loan Richard had taken against our house and closed all joint accounts. Financially, I was more secure than ever. But more than that, I'd discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd started consulting for museums again, using my expertise to help institutions with acquisitions and authentication. I joined the board of a nonprofit that provided legal assistance to victims of financial elder abuse. I'd started speaking at women's groups about recognizing the warning signs I'd missed, about trusting your instincts, about fighting back when someone tries to destroy you. I'd become an advocate, a voice, a survivor who refused to hide or feel ashamed. Richard had tried to erase me, but instead, he'd freed me to become more visible, more powerful, more authentically myself than I'd ever been. David had remained a close friend, visiting often, checking in regularly. He'd been right that night in my kitchen when he'd said I wasn't alone. I had community. I had people who cared. I had daughters who flew across the country at a moment's notice. I had a support system that Richard had never been able to see because he'd been too busy planning my destruction. As the movers unloaded furniture in my new apartment, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Central Park. The trees were budding with spring growth. Runners and cyclists moved along the paths below. Life continuing, vibrant, and real. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Vivian's appeal was denied. She's serving the full 22 years. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled. Another piece falling into place. Justice being served. Emily appeared beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. To new beginnings, she said, handing me one. Sarah joined us, raising her own glass. To the strongest woman we know. To our mother, who survived and thrived. We clinked glasses, and I looked at my daughters' faces. Beautiful, strong, accomplished women who'd supported me through the worst crisis of my life. Richard had dismissed them as busy with their own careers, tokens to be managed. He'd been so wrong about them, just as he'd been wrong about me. To truth, I said, and to never settling for less than we deserve. That night, after my daughters had gone to their hotel, I stood on my private terrace overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, carrying the scent of spring and possibility. Somewhere in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Richard was in a cell, his life effectively over. Vivian was in a facility in upstate New York, facing decades behind bars. And I was here, free, safe, thriving. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, walking into David's repair shop to pick up a phone, having no idea my life was about to shatter and reassemble into something completely different. That Margaret had been trusting to a fault, comfortable in her illusions, unprepared for the darkness that lived inside the man she'd married. This Margaret, the one standing on this terrace, was different, harder in some ways, softer in others, more cautious, but also more confident. Aware that betrayal can come from anywhere, but also that survival and victory are possible even after the worst has happened. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless, that financial independence is critical, that trusting your instincts can save your life, that forgiving yourself for being deceived is just as important as holding the deceiver accountable, that women, especially women my age, are vastly underestimated, and that underestimation can be our greatest weapon. Richard had spent 32 years conditioning me, as he'd put it in those messages, training me to be compliant, trusting, easy to manipulate. But what he'd actually been doing was giving me a masterclass in deception. When I finally needed to deceive him back, wearing that wire and getting his confession, I'd learned from the best. His own tactics had destroyed him. I raised my champagne glass to the Manhattan skyline, to the life stretching before me, to the woman I'd become through fire and survival. Here's to you, Margaret Ashford, I said aloud. You made it. You won. And I had. Completely. Utterly. Permanently. My story could have ended with my body at the bottom of a ravine, Richard collecting my inheritance, and 2 daughters mourning a mother whose death seemed like a tragic accident. Instead, it ended with me standing in my own apartment, financially secure, emotionally strong, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me and ready for whatever came next. I was 59 years old. My hair was completely silver now, and I wore it proudly. My daughters called me weakly. My calendar was full of museum consultations and speaking engagements. I had purpose, passion, and peace. Richard Ashford had tried to write my ending, but I'd taken the pen from his hand and written my own story instead, a story of survival, strength, and victory. And I was still writing it, one day at a time, in my own voice, on my own terms, with my power fully intact. This was my life now, real, true, and completely mine. And it was beautiful.